that need to do this training in regards to the deep learning. Give me a sense of the scale. We've talked a little bit about the data centers, but how much energy, land, water is being used to power OpenAI? Just specifically as one company.
Yeah, to power open, that's really hard because they don't actually tell us this. So we only have figures for the industry at large and the amount of data centers
So it's
that
not
are
in their
being
annual
deployed.
reports, for instance?
No. Well, they don't have annual reports because they're not a public company.
Of course.
Yeah.
Huh.
So that's, one of the ways that and actually it doesn't matter if they're a public company because Google and Microsoft, they do have annual reports where they say how much capital they've spent on data center construction. They do not break down how much of those data centers are being used for AI. They also have sustainability reports where they talk about the water and carbon and things like that. But they do not break down how much of that is coming from AI either. And they also massage that data a lot to make it seem better than it actually is. But even with the massaging, there was that story 2 years ago, or sorry, last year, 2024, where both Google and Microsoft reported, I think it was a 30% and 50% jump in their carbon emissions because largely driven by this data center development.
Yeah. And also the context here is it was one of the good news stories of the last sort of 10 to 15 years is that CO2 emissions per capita in the US had kind of plateaued, right? Across the West had kind of plateaued.
And actually in the UK, energy consumption dropped.
Yeah. I mean, we stopped making things, but still.
Yeah.
Everything's made in East Asia now. But no, but it was kind of a good story and I kind of bought it, right? I thought that, we'd kind of plateaued. Obviously, the Global South would consume more energy, but we are as well. Should we look at these companies as kind of analogous to the East India Company of the 19th century?
That is the analogy that I've increasingly started using, especially with the Trump administration in power, because the British East India Company very much was a corporate empire and started off not very imperial. They just started off as a company, very small company based in London. And of course, through economic trade agreements with India, gained significant economic power, political power, and eventually became the apex predator in that ecosystem. And that's when they started being very imperial in nature. And they were the entire time abetted by the British Empire, the nation state empire. So you have a corporate empire, you have a nation state empire. And I literally see that dynamic playing out now, where the US government is also in its empire era. The Trump administration has quite literally used words to suggest that he wants to expand and fortify the American empire. And he sees these corporate empires like OpenAI as his empire building assets. And so I think he is probably seeing it in the same way that the British Crown saw the British East India Company of, let's just let this company acquire all these resources, do all these things, and then eventually we'll nationalize the company, and then India formally becomes a colony of the British Empire. So Trump, whatever the equivalent, modern day equivalent would be of nationalizing these companies, is his endgame. Like, he is helping them strike all these deals and installing all this American hardware and software all around the world with the hope that then those become national assets. And then, there was actually just a recent op-ed in Financial Times from Mariette Schaake, one of the former EU parliamentarians, who pointed out, isn't it so convenient for the US to get all of this American infrastructure installed everywhere around the world so that the US government could literally turn it off at any time? I mean, if you want to talk about empire building, there's that. But at the same time, these corporate empires are also trying to use the American empire as an asset to their empire building ambitions. So there's a very tenuous alliance between Silicon Valley and Washington right now, in that each one is trying to use the other and ultimately trying to dominate the other. And there's a growing popularity in Silicon Valley of this idea of a politics of exit, this idea that democracy doesn't work anymore. We need to find other ways of organizing